here we are. And scene. Or that's like the end. I don't know. That's just
And scene.
Action.
Okay.
Yeah.
action. Yeah.
Take two.
Ignore that term.
Take two. All right. Welcome
Edit
back.
to the bloopers.
Well, I mean, I told Trent he should do like a whole bloopers reel.
You
All
should.
right.
That would be great.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Progressive Rehab and Strength podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rory Alter, clinical coach here at Progressive Rehab and Strength, with my lovely co-host, as usual, Dr. Alyssa Havison, also a clinical coach here at Progressive Rehab and Strength. And in today's episode, we are joined by Siana Sylvester. She is a mental performance coach of My Mental Flex. So we're excited to meet with Siana today to talk about the mental and emotional aspect of reconciling with injury and sport, and dealing with the psychological components that go with overcoming an injury and going through the rehab process. So, Siana, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what mental performance coaching is and what you do?
Sure. Well, Rory and Alyssa, thank you so much for having me on. I'm honored to be a guest here today. My name is Siana Sylvester. My background is in sport and performance psychology. I have been working with youth through professional athletes on their mental game since 2013. I went to University of Hartford, got my undergrad in psychology with a minor in sociology. And while I was there, I studied psychological readiness to return to sport after injury. And I interned with Cape Cod Baseball League. I quickly learned as I started my undergrad degree that recovery from injury is so much mental as it is physical. And that sparked my interest in sport and performance psychology. And I looked back on my high school experience when I got injured and decided, oh, if I had a sports psychology consultant or coach along the way with me, maybe I would have reached more of my potential and had a lot more opportunity in sport. I went on to Springfield College and got my master's in athletic counseling there, where I studied under a very big leader in the field of sport injury and psychological readiness, Dr. Britt Brewer and Dr. Judy Van Raal, who specialized in self-talk. So I worked very closely underneath their watch. I worked with a lot of different teams, never powerlifters, but I was in the rehab clinic where I worked side by side with strength and conditioning coaches and athletic trainers. And what we found is that athletes who were working with athletic counselors in training had a higher psychological readiness to return to sport, less fear of re-injury. And so that was really exciting for me to see that, firsthand. After Springfield College, I went off to, I worked for the NFL for a short time in their player engagement department. And what we did was, there are 3 stages in the NFL in the player engagement department. It's prep, life, and next. The prep portion of the NFL is like players in development, trying to foster athletes and getting into football and, assisting with getting them into high level play and hopefully onto the NFL. As we know, that's pretty difficult to get to that level. Once they're there, we call that life. So how do we help athletes who have been recruited to play or drafted to play and they didn't finish their degree? How do we assist them with getting their degree requirements? How do we assist them with being a rookie and transitioning into a professional career where you suddenly have access to a lot more money, a lot more opportunities? So how do you manage that? How do you navigate that? And then we did a lot of the next stuff. So how do you transition out of the game? A lot of athletic identity, stuff with their spouses. A lot of spouses identified as NFL wives. How do we provide them with the support that they need so that they can transition into other areas of life? And so I got the opportunity to work there for a little bit for a season. After that, I worked at Queens College in their student life department. That was a short period of time. Worked over at St. Anthony's High School, a pretty big high school here on Long Island. There's about 2,500 kids there, very big athletic program. I was leading their international department. And then I got this awesome opportunity to work for Higher Echelon, which is my day job. It's a consulting firm where we provide leadership and executive coaching to elite military professionals and also CEOs, mid-level managers, that kind of thing. And we approach leadership a little bit different. We treat leadership as a performance. So we give leaders the mental skills that are needed to kind of manage the day to day, manage the stress and anxiety. How do you influence the group and start to build a culture that helps you get the results that you want within your organization? And then I started my own consulting firm called Mental Flex, which I absolutely love. It's gotten me back into the work that I really am passionate about with athletes. And I work a lot with high school and college players mainly. I've had some elite athletes, like some professional equestrians have found me, but my sweet spot is really with baseball and team sports. So it's been interesting to kind of reflect back on the individual sport, and as I prep for this interview to get ready for you guys, and think about how the emotional response and mental response to injury can be a little bit different as an individual athlete than is for a team athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's how we got here today.
Awesome. I mean, I didn't know all of that about you. And obviously, like
Yeah.
we've been friends for a little while, but very new friends. So that was very interesting and exciting to hear. So I have two questions because you did mention your injury. So, we always like to ask some kind of relatable questions. So I think that, when we're dealing with a sensitive topic such as injury, and identity shifts, I think it's important for us to relate as much as we can on the level of the athlete as well. So you did mention that you had an injury in high school. So can you just share a little bit about that? What sport did you play, and what was your injury? And why do you feel mental performance coaching would have been helpful then?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I was a competitive cheerleader my whole life. I started at the age of 5 and, went on to high school and was on the varsity team as a freshman and competed at the varsity level all 4 years, was a 2 season captain at my high school, and something I'm really proud of. But my freshman year during the basketball season, I was learning a new tumbling skill. Obviously, there's gymnastics, there's stunting, there's cheer, there's dance, a lot of different aspects of the competitive cheer world. A lot of things that can be fatal and pretty serious injuries if you make a mistake. And so I was learning a new gymnastic skill, and I hyperextended my elbow during a backward motion, and it was pretty severe. My entire team was present to see that, and so that was pretty traumatic for them to witness an injury like that, where your arm is, going the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was out for the rest of the season, and my arm was stuck in a very awkward position for a long period of time. And once I was cleared didn't have to have surgery, which was very, very lucky. But I did have some pretty extensive physical therapy that went along with that, of like prying the arm back open.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which was horrible. And I know a lot of people like stim and they like that. It was horrible. I hated it. It was very, very painful. I found during my rehabbing of that injury that it was very difficult to not focus on the pain. It was really difficult to not move past, what was happening in that current moment and be focused on what I was getting back to. But I did eventually figure that out and got cleared to return to sport, but I never got back that backward motion again.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fear of re-injury was really strong for me. Um, I was very nervous that it was going to happen again. I didn't trust that my body was able to execute that skill, and it was absolutely a mental block. There was no physical issue that was preventing me from being able to do that skill. It wasn't a mobility thing or range of motion thing or anything like that. It was absolutely a mental block. And if I had worked with a sport and performance psychologist or a mental performance consultant or coach, there's a lot of different names for us in the field, but if I'd worked with a mental performance coach, I would have had this opportunity to really explore that fear of re-injury, get with reality, that it's pretty unlikely that that was going to happen again. And I would have been able to get in some mental reps with use of visualization, some other mental tools, and some pre-performance routines that I would be able to build that confidence back up if I had that opportunity and had that exposure, but I'll tell you, as a high school kid, I didn't even know there was a whole industry for this.
Yeah, neither.
Um,
To be honest, neither did I until I met you. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think that's why this podcast is so important because, like, if Alyssa, I don't know if you knew that knew about this field, but if I didn't know that as a physical therapist, elite power lifter, if I didn't know that, then I can imagine that everybody else out there doesn't know that either.
Yeah,
Alyssa,
the
did you know?
average high school kid for sure does not
Yeah.
know it. No.
Alyssa, I'm curious. Did you know about this realm?
I did. I briefly considered going down
Yeah,
sort of
you.
the
That's why I.
sports psych road,
Yeah.
and did
Well, I
not for
knew
any
that
particular
sports
reason.
psychology is a field, but I didn't realize like how it ties into this kind of stuff, you know? Like I've never experienced it. I've never seen a powerlifting coach or sports team that I've been involved in that had any of that. So it's very rare, if
I think
anything.
that that's the problem. And so
Yeah.
me, when I just sort of like when I say I thought about it, like it crossed my mind as an option. And then I thought, but I never see anybody working in that field because we don't say, and maybe that's because I wasn't involved with like collegiate sports at my school or anything like that, where I would have seen a sports psychologist like in action. But maybe we need more of you guys out there.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, one of my missions at Mental Flex is to just normalize the use of sport and performance
hmm
psychology in a player's development. And you're spot on, Alyssa. It's not just that you weren't at the collegiate level. It's pretty hard to find it. I mean, it's becoming more normalized. All of the MLB teams do have a mental performance coach, multiple mental performance coaches, who do utilize a lot of sports like stuff. You see it a lot more in golf, a lot of those precision sports that maybe have more of a relaxed and calm mindset for optimal performance. You see it more there.
hmm
Um, but it still has such a long way to go, even though it's been around for a good amount of time now.
Well, and I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that in some beliefs, psychology is not
Mm.
as accepted, and with
hmm
sports being a physical performance avenue, I don't know how. I mean, maybe it's newer that it's becoming more accepted to incorporate the actual like psychology and like mental training into it. Um, but it's just thought.
Yeah, I mean, you hear so many coaches or parents just focus, just focus, just focus. But focus isn't just a cognitive skill. It's a mental and emotional skill as well. And I think that's kind of like where we we lack in terms of understanding it or providing services for our clients. Not us. I mean, yes, we are not mental performance coaches, but we understand the value of that. And that's things just by nature of our experience is our experiences as athletes in the sport, which is why I think it's important to work with physical therapists and coaches collectively who are experienced in your individual sport, to understand it's not just focus and push yourself to do better, especially after injury. It's okay. What is this multifactorial picture that we're trying to rebuild or regain? Um, which I wanted to follow up on one other thing that you said when you were giving us your kind of brief introduction of what you do and how you got there. You mentioned psychological readiness for return to sport. So I think that let's talk about what that means, and how you measure that, because I think that's kind of the crux. And correct me if I'm wrong. That's kind of like the crux of what you're doing, with your, especially when we're talking about specifically returning from injury or illness.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to psychological readiness to return to sport, there's not really a great way to measure it yet. Dr. Brett Brewer and his colleagues at Springfield College are doing a lot of great work in this area because what we know with athletes is they all want to get back, typically. And usually there's some when they respond to questionnaires, there's a lot of biases, and knowing if that data is capital T truth, fact, is this really fact? Is this really what's going on with the athlete versus, are they, using some social desirability to appear as if they're
Mhm.
really ready to get
Mhm.
back. So they are working on better ways to measure to navigate around that to get a capital T truth, more fact around it than a lowercase t truth of what
Mhm.
we really think.
Right.
But a lot of psychological readiness to return to sport comes down to fear of re-injury. A lot of athletes will feel like they're really ready in that rehab setting, in that athletic training room, and then they get to their first practice and all the what ifs come. What if this happens? What if I'm not as good as I used to be? What if I can't prove it to myself? What if I can't do that skill as good? And it can come down to like a subconscious level. Well, a lot of athletes will hold back. They'll hesitate, and what we know is those are things that can lead to re-injury, right? All being distracted by all that noise and feeling that stress and feeling that tension absolutely can lead to more opportunity for injury to happen.
Mhm.
So, um, something that I will work with athletes on who are experiencing this high level of, maybe they're not willing to admit it, but they're showing signs in the way that we're speaking together in their fear of re-injury, or if I'm looking, watching them play, noticing them hesitating, noticing them holding back, seeing that they can do it in practice, but they're not doing it in a competition setting.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's a really big indicator that that's probably a mental block and something worth exploring, and trying to uncover, trying to focus on what do we actually know, what can we control in this situation. Well, I know I rehab the hell out of that thing. I rehabbed, lost my headphone there. I rehabbed harder than anybody ever did. I gave it 100%. I've been in touch with my doctors. I have very good awareness of what to expect about my injury and so forth. So what can we control? What can we focus on? Because when we're getting distracted by all those what ifs, that creates cause for concern, right? Now we're focused on what is not important right now. And a big
Mhm.
thing that I teach athletes is the WIN acronym, which is what's important now. What's important now. So being really critical and hard on yourself for maybe missing a big lift that maybe you normally used to be able to do. Beating yourself up in that moment is probably not productive for your performance. That's probably not a good opportunity to be doing it right then and there. Where is a better opportunity to reflect on your performance, and where could we bake in some time for you to do that so that we can satisfy that need of wanting to get better and really critiquing it, but not doing it in a place where it's maybe not as productive,
Mhm.
aka during competition.
Right.
If
Mhm.
we could hate ourselves into being great, we'd all be perfect by now.
Mhm.
And so if we can notice those thoughts that are coming up that really are unproductive, then we can replace them with something that is more productive and helpful.
I really love what you're saying about replacing those thoughts, because I think that so often there's this whole mindset of don't think that or don't do that. And whenever I'm talking to somebody about like what, sometimes my clients will say, I think I'm like just psyching myself out or whatever. Like I always need to know what that, tell me what you're thinking, because I have to start there. But we can't just say don't think that thing. Now you're just thinking about not thinking that thing and you're still thinking about the
Yeah.
thing. We always have to replace it or redirect the mindset. Otherwise, we're not doing anything. And now
Yeah.
it's like you're beating yourself up for thinking about the thing that you're not supposed to be thinking about because you can't stop thinking about it. It's
It's
a
a
whole
Gosh,
vicious
cycle.
cycle.
and how hard is it to perform when your mind is going like that? Of course, it's more difficult and challenging. And you're spot on there that, actually the word don't, there's a lot of research that the brain doesn't recognize the contraction. And so we actually want to use there's two types of self-talk. One self-talk is motivational. You got this. Let's go. Let's do this. The instructional self-talk is giving the direction that you want the brain to follow. So in baseball, don't strike out is actually giving your brain the instruction because
To
it doesn't
strike out.
recognize the contraction to strike out. So don't
Mm.
miss this lift. Don't screw this up. Don't, however
Oh
you
my
want to put
gosh,
it,
that's
is actually giving your brain the
insane.
instruction to do that. So
Because I
you want to
pretty
correct
much,
it.
I pretty much do that.
Well,
So
I
you
mean,
might think of how to replace it.
I
Yeah.
used to do that. I mean, I have spent like years fixing what goes on in my head, and it really is something that I think takes like practice. And even when you think you have control over it, you don't. But like, I used to be a very negative self talker, not intentionally, but like, oh no, is this going to be too heavy? Can I do this? Like, what, that sort of stuff.
Mm.
But like, or like, don't screw up, don't miss this. And I think that like what you're saying is
I
really
need to
right.
correct myself. I don't always do that because I do have the let's go. I do like for weeks before the competition, I do envision myself completing that third lift and winning the competition. So I do have a lot of visualization of like
Mhm.
like the doing, not the don'ting.
Mhm.
But I definitely like when I'm anxious about something or when I don't believe in myself, that's when I go to the don't language.
Mm.
Um, but I want to pause this conversation because I want to. We can definitely continue this conversation because it's one of the topics that I have on our list. But before we get into that, I want to talk about actually getting injured and so the stuff that happens before we start to develop that anxiety in competition. So while injury rates are low in the sport of powerlifting and strength training, they do exist because we can't avoid injury. We can't mitigate injury. It's going to happen no matter what you do, crossing the road, looking both ways. Something's going to happen to you at some point in your life. Okay. But research shows that when athletes in the strength sports or powerlifting specifically do get injured, it's not usually the acute traumatic. It's more of the kind of chronic creep up on you type thing. And it only interrupts training for a very short period of time, usually like 1 to 4 weeks, if at all. And there is the ability for most people to continue to train around the injury so they don't have to take time off completely. But what are some strategies that athletes can use to help them overcome this kind of like defeated attitude or mindset when they are injured that can help them continue to train and stay motivated?
Well, I think the key point here is that people very often underestimate the psychological and emotional response to injury, whether it's chronic or acute. And it is important to expect that you will feel some level of frustration, stress, anxiety, what ifs. It would be normal for you to feel those things. And so to not feel like you're the only one who could
Mm-hmm.
possibly feel that is step number one. You're not alone. Acknowledging the fact that you are feeling an injury and noticing that you are a human being who's not a robot, who might have to modify the way that they do things is the first step in being able to move, forward, right? I think another thing is noticing your mood is probably likely to change when you get injured. When we exercise, we feel all those good neurotransmitters moving through our brains. We feel that endorphins, we feel like the serotonin and the dopamine and the stuff that feels good. And so it's no wonder why you're not feeling as great because you're maybe not getting that level of endorphins that you're typically used to. So it would make sense that somebody is not feeling super motivated to get back into training after they experience an injury. The quicker we can acknowledge the fact that we are feeling some of those negative emotions and the stuff that doesn't feel as good, the quicker we can accept that, the quicker we can move on. Now, some strategies that I do work with athletes on is defining their motivation. What is your why? Why do you do what you do? Um, Whether that's intrinsic motivators, such as I do this because like I want to be healthy. I want to be the strongest I can be. It makes me excited to know that because my family history had this disease or whatever, that if I keep doing what I'm doing, I can be preventative. I can be proactive at that. That might be an intrinsic motivator for someone. Extrinsic motivators are just as awesome. It's just usually they're not within our control. So if you like to get validation from other people, you like to get the likes on Instagram, or you like to get that praise, that public praise, the public recognition, you like to win money or get compensated for what you do, those can be really strong motivators, but they're not typically within our control. So one of the strategies that I work with athletes on, regardless of what type of injury they have, is defining their why. What's your mission? Why do you do this sport and not a different sport? What is it about this sport that lights you up? If you were to look back on your career and say, I want people to be able to say this about me. How are we living, with those values? Are those values aligned with the way that you're acting right now? Are you living in your mission, or are you doing some stuff that's hindering your progress in that mission? So number one is, let's get clear on why you do what you do. uh, I mean, even before that, let's acknowledge the fact that, like, it does really suck that you got injured. Like, that sucks. Let's
Mm-hmm.
let's call it what it is. And the quicker that we can acknowledge that, the quicker we can kind of move on from that.
I really like the talking about the why behind it, because I think a lot of times we're focused on goals and not why that even is the goal, or why you're doing the thing to reach that goal. And when you have pain and the goal is to squat X amount of weight, that's not always helpful to like doing what we need to do to get there. Cause sometimes what we need to do is to slow down, and like looking at something that feels like we're chasing it but can't do the things to get there is not always very motivating. But I think that really diving into the why, and maybe we should ask this more from the beginning of when we start working with someone, like, why do you do this? Because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Rory, but that's not something that it's like a deeper question. I don't usually ask the why
I'm
do you want
writing
to
it
barbell
down.
train?
I'm writing it down so we can add it to our intake form.
Yeah, because it's something that I ask, there are times when it comes up, uh, when we're struggling to do things, or make changes to our like routine, or I mean, I think nutritional changes, when somebody wants to lose weight, I think that's a lot of times that the why comes up, at least from
Mm-hmm.
me, if we're having trouble with that. And sorry.
Cats.
But I think, having that ahead of time and then revisiting it when we need to, I think could be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. The more clear you can get on why is it so important to you that you are able to squat X amount of weight? Why does that matter? What is that? How do you identify with that? What value are you living, that's serving you to be able to do that X amount of weight? So if we can get really clear on what motivates somebody, it serves as a compass. It serves as a decision maker. Should I do that level of weight, or should I do this level of weight?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is it helping me live within my mission and who I want to be? Or am I living in a mission that's, what we call is a shadow mission? Are we doing the opposite? What behaviors are not moving you toward your best self? So you create a world of stress, anxiety, and fear of re-injury when you are complacent and you isolate in your room and you do XYZ. You live a life of passion and excitement and joy when you push through the really difficult times, when you show up, as XYZ, when you're very organized, when you're prepared, whatever those values are. If we could get really clear on that, it gives you a little compass to decide, am I acting with integrity of my mission, or am I kind of living in my shadow mission in this moment?
I like it. I think that, we can look at injuries, and this, from what you just said, kind of made me go down this thought process. When we look at, not when we're not injured and when we're performing at our top level, and we're able to give it our all in training and push through those hard things, there's an underlying ability to grasp at what we need to push through that, to push through the hard things, because training and competing is not easy, right? And when we can look at our ability, and I think Alyssa and I, we talk about this with our clients, and I love when they have this realization of how um, barbell training, resistance training, heavy training, powerlifting, kind of the the principles of attacking a heavy weight and accomplishing a max effort, or pushing through a really hard set, being a little bit anxious about the load that's going to be on the bar today, but we did it even though it was hard, and we were a little bit fearful of it, or we were extremely fearful of it, and we still got through it, and how that kind of applies to things in our life. When it makes us more resilient to the physical components of the world, but also being able to push through hard things in our life. And I think that sometimes people shut down when it's an injury, but they can apply that mindset to other areas of their life, but shut down when it's the injury. And from my perspective, an injury is just like pushing through a hard training cycle, getting through a hard training cycle, or pushing through a hard set. Like, just a different, like, microcosm. It's just the same principles and mindset we can take and apply to the injury recovery process. But I think a lot of people are fearful because an injury means that they can't do the thing that they want to do, or they can't do the thing that they want to do at the level that they want to be doing it. But it is still, like, if we take that mindset and apply it to other things in life, why can't we apply it to injury? So why don't we talk a little bit about what are some of the things that hold people back when they are injured, aside from motivation, and aside from those endorphins? Is there anything else that you see?
That hold them back from taking action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there can be a lot of things. We're not A lot of athletes aren't willing to acknowledge the pain, the emotional and mental pain that they're feeling in that moment. And what you were just describing, Rory, makes perfect sense. Sometimes we got to meet the athlete where they are, and they are feeling really upset. They are feeling this great sense of loss. Before psych of sport injury really dive deeper into the field of research, they actually use the grief model
Mm-hmm.
for athletes who are going through like pretty traumatic injuries, career season ending
Mm-hmm.
injuries, not really this chronic use injury. But um if we don't acknowledge with athletes that they're feeling this level of loss and anxiety, and validate, it makes perfect sense that you're not feeling motivated to get up and do this. It makes perfect sense that you're isolating, or you're binge watching Netflix for X amount of hours instead of getting in the gym, because it's serving as a coping mechanism for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's serving, it's giving you a level of comfort that you just don't feel right now. Sport maybe was your comfort zone. That was your outlet. That's where I managed my stress. And now I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So as you've talked about many times before, it's like, how can we exercise by modifying, maybe not using that limb? So like, I see a lot of ACL or ankle injuries in the work that I do. They seem to be pretty common. Or like a Tommy John surgery, an athlete recovering from that. And so how can we get in that sweat, getting those endorphins with a different exercise? Maybe we're not moving toward the goal of rehabbing, but we're working toward your goal of staying healthy and staying fit and working
Mm-hmm.
on your conditioning and so forth. So we can kind of navigate around that. But I would say an athlete is not going to be able to acknowledge that inner block, whatever that sensitivity, whatever that button is that's being pushed when they've gotten injured. Like, oh, I'm just not good enough, right? That little thing inside of us comes up, that little inner block. If we're not willing to address that, and we're trying to move right toward action, goal setting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Trying to move right towards setting goals.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I see a lot of setbacks with athletes who are coming back from injury, is that they really haven't fully process the injury that they're feeling. They're feeling a sense of guilt, something that they did.
Mm-hmm.
If only I did it this way, this wouldn't have happened. And they're not ready to accept the fact that, like, okay, this is the state that I'm in. This is the control I have to go forward. It makes perfect sense that I'm feeling pretty upset, pretty frustrated, pretty stressed. Anybody in my situation would be feeling that. And once we can normalize that and maybe figure out where that comes from, then we can move on to the goal setting, which is kind of those outer blocks. Like, what are the steps that I need to do in order to come back from injury? But typically there's an inner block that's being touched there, that unless we acknowledge and validate it and make the athlete feel like they're understood, it can be really hard to get the buy-in for the goals
Mhm.
that we want them to do. I find myself having to slow myself down because I see all the progress that they could be making if they just did this one thing, and like they came up with it on their own, and so they should be so bought in, and they're still not taking action. They're feeling very stuck. They're still picking up the remote or still eating that bag of snacks until midnight, not getting good sleep, and so forth. And what I have to do in those moments is pull myself back and really meet them where they are and kind of digest, you know, where they're really feeling and what's really coming up for them, so that we can then move on to that next step of taking action.
So if someone is in that position, what are some strategies, especially the person who's kind of listening to this, who's coachless and doesn't have a sports psych coach or mental performance coach in their corner? What are some strategies when a person is in that position, like the Netflix and chill instead of doing what they need to do kind of thing?
That's
Why are
not what Netflix and
I
chill
know, I know, I
is.
know, I know, I know. I didn't want to say Netflix and chips. Maybe they want to be Netflixing and chilling. Is that a term? Netflixing.
Netflixing, it is now.
It is now.
Oh God.
So okay, they're sitting on the couch watching Netflix, binging. Um, so what are some strategies that they can do if they recognize they're in? Obviously, they have to recognize they're in that position, because the first step is acknowledgement and recognizing. But once they're at this moment of recognition, what are some strategies that they can do to get out of that? Because I think that is kind of where the and we're not even talking about like elite level athletes. I mean, obviously this can happen to elite powerlifters, but this is, I would say, quite common with the person who is a recreational lifter, where they don't have the support, or there are other things that, like, oh, listen, I just had a major injury from lifting. I'm never going to lift again because I don't want to get injured, that kind of thing. But they love it, but and they enjoy it. They love those endorphins and they know it's healthy for them, but they're in this position where they're like totally lost, and kind of giving into the couch.
I mean, go get support. Like, that is the number one thing. There's a lot of, as you know, in your field, there's a lot of research that supports that social support is critical for any type of achievement that you want to have. We all have these three psychological needs. We have a need to be in control of our own life. And so if mom is coming up to you and saying, why are you sitting there and watching Netflix? You should be sleeping. You should be doing all these things. Well, they feel like they're being told to do it instead of this perceived autonomy that
Hmm.
exists. So, like, how do we, one, build the awareness to notice, okay, this coping mechanism really isn't helpful? Where could I find a different coping mechanism? Typically, it's through some level of social support, accountability group. Can you create a texting chat with your friends where it says, I want to work out 3 times this week. Can I do a little humble brag and share it in our text group? Can you share yours with me? It's motivating for me. So creating that accountability could be helpful. Um, I mean, I hate to do this shameless plug, but working with a mental performance coach is going to help you understand, why are you stuck there? What's preventing
Hmm.
you from taking action? What purpose is that Netflix and chips serving you? Versus, like, what are some other things that would align with your mission, your why you're doing this in the first place? What are some behaviors that would feel better? And it makes perfect sense that somebody is sitting on the couch and chilling and they're relaxing, and we all have those days. But when that's becoming your norm and that's
Mhm.
becoming your habit, your brain has now created a new pathway that at this time at night, this is what I do with my time.
Mhm.
And so breaking that habit will create frustration, it'll create more stress, it'll create more anxiety, and the brain needs that frustration to create a new neural pathway to the new habit. So it actually is like productive feedback that you're feeling that frustration, that you're feeling that resistance. That's good. You're supposed to
Mhm.
feel that when you're learning
Mhm.
something new.
Mhm.
A lot of athletes will shut down when they're trying to learn something new, oftentimes because they're very good at what they do. They're used to getting it right the first
Mhm.
time. And so now they've experienced an injury, maybe they've never experienced one before, and they don't know how to cope with that. And so if you're really clear on your why, the why you do what you do, that serves as a motivator. Reflecting on that often will make it a habit to see it in real time. The other thought is like you just really got to build some awareness, and there's a lot of stuff that you can do on your mental game that if you're not ready to get back in the gym, you can make strides in your physical recovery without having to do those physical skills. Like you touched on it with visualization. There's research that supports that although you're not physically doing those motions, the neurotransmitters are firing and your muscles are doing those movements without actually moving. So you don't
Mhm.
risk injury, but you get the reps in when you do visualization. So somebody like myself, a mental performance coach, would be able to teach an athlete what are the real components of a visualization script that make
Mhm.
it helpful and successful. Like
Right.
I've worked with athletes who say, I've tried visualization, that doesn't really work for me. Well, how distracted are you during that time? Number one. Number two, how descriptive are you being during that time? How vivid have you made that? Have you captured all five of your senses? Have you tried to warm up? Right, we have to warm up the same way we would warm up our physical skills. Can you warm up your mental skills before you jump into that visualization? Are you trying to use it during competition? Are you using it before competition? Where is it working for you? And so the kid that's the athlete that's sitting on the couch and really feels so upset and so stuck, sometimes it's helpful to put like a time limit. How much time am I really going to allow myself to wallow in this feeling?
Mhm.
Right. And then what? And then what? And what are some other coping skills that I could use that would help me reach my goals and not just play the victim mode of feeling
Mhm.
sorry for myself? And what energy do you really want to show up with? And that's a conscious decision that really takes a lot of work with self-awareness, building that self-awareness of noticing what behaviors are you doing that really aren't productive. You
I
have to
think
be aware.
I think that's really like a tornado of a situation for a lot of people, especially because, you know, you're depressed. You don't feel like getting into the gym because you don't know what you can do. Things hurt. You're scared of making them worse. And you don't really necessarily know, the average person might not know what they should do. So without that support, whether it be from like, you know, sports psychologist or mental coach or a coach for some guidance, I think that there are a lot of people that get either they don't have it in them to kick them, give themselves a kick in the ass to get off the sofa and do something, or if they do that, they might not know what the right thing to do is once they go and do something,
Yeah,
or they feel like they
like
just
they
can't
hurt
do
their back.
enough.
They hurt their back and okay, so I can't squat, so what do I do? And they don't know anything but squatting, you know? And I think that's, you said it before, Siana, get help.
Yeah.
You know, I think when it comes down to it, if you recognize, I think, we talked about recognition being the first step. It's kind of like alcoholism, like you have to recognize you have a problem before you can get help, but I think that a lot of it is like, well, what do I do if I can't do this? And they don't know what to do. So there's the mental aspect and the emotional aspect, but there's also the like physical aspect of like, okay, well, all I know is squat, bench, and deadlift, or all I know is the barbell. So, or all I know is powerlifting training. So how do I go back into the gym when that, or go back to training when that hurts me, or that is unsafe for me right now? So I
Mhm.
think that the key, and I mean, from my perspective, and I think it's kind of what you're saying here is get help to kind of
Mhm.
identify all these things. And when you can surround yourself with a team of people who can support you, whether it be your friends and your accountability, like, okay, even though I can't barbell train right now because I have a back injury, I can still walk, you know? I don't have to. And I think that's kind of like where some people kind of fall out of training after injury. It's like, okay, maybe right now you can't go into the gym because you do need that time away from barbell training acutely, right? So then they take 1 or 2 weeks off, but they're not filling that space or that habitual time with anything. They're just going and
Mm.
playing video games or doing whatever, Netflix and chipsing, or something else. They're just sitting on Instagram all day, and they're just their habit of training is changed, and they but because they don't know what they can do and they don't have the support to get out of that like tornado effect, like Alyssa said, um, they get stuck there.
Yeah. And a great question is like, where can you find the answer for that?
Mm-hmm.
Creating that buy-in from them. A lot of the times, I'll ask athletes like, what would you tell your friend to do in this situation? Because that kind of takes away the personalization and you can start to think of solutions
Mm-hmm.
instead of the brain saying that won't work for me. Right. And so, social support, oh, that's for people who are soft. That's for
Mm-hmm.
people who have real problems. This isn't a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, especially, in the work that you guys do, it's probably pretty inevitable that you're going to experience some level of injury.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are you doing to build that support network before that happens? What can you do preventatively to plan for that, to plan
Mm-hmm.
for those barriers coming up in your training so that you have the tools that you need before you need them?
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. We just the person that we spoke with before, so this will be Eric Helm's podcast, which is coming out in April, so after yours. We asked him, um, what would you tell people, like knowing what you know now, what would you tell someone in terms of not kind of associating their identity only with their performance? And um, he said a similar question, like if you looked at another power lifter, would them not winning be like anything less? No. Like, so why do you have to win all the time? you know or why do you always have to perform at the top level all the time? And then kind of like putting that into place before you get injured, having that knowledge and that understanding and that ability to support yourself when you are injured, I think is really important, and he talked about that as well. So I think that's key. And I think, like you said before, not to do a shameless plug here, but I think this is why it's so important to have a coach too, because having a coach, having that support, and being in a community of being having that support there in advance. And Alyssa, I love that, we should definitely add that question, the what's your why? So like exploring these things in advance, because it is inevitable. Every sport has an injury rate. And if you've done your sport or your exercise mode for any length of time, at some point you'll get injured. And we cannot prevent injuries. They are not something that someone can avoid their entire life. So having that knowledge of understanding that injuries will happen. They do happen, and they happen to everyone, and you're not alone in them happening to you. And that's why we want to have these like higher level athletes on our podcast and talk to them about their injuries, because you aren't alone and it happens to the best of the best. It's nothing that you did. Like you can't like say, oh, it's that one rep or that I drank the wrong thing before training that caused it,
Forgot
which
my pre-workout.
which I know, we can go into talking about rituals and habits as it relates to training and how people become very like, oh, I didn't like set up right. And that's why everything went wrong. We even talked about, I think, the time that I failed the lift at competition because I had the wrong belt on, but I didn't even, I didn't even realize I had the wrong belt. It was just like, I blamed it on the belt, but who knows why I failed that lift actually. But then I realized I didn't have the right belts on. And then in my next competition, I was like, I basically had squat anxiety ever since that one, and I'm like, oh, well, is it the wrong belt? Do I have the right belt? Like, what color belt is this? Everybody knows what color belt I'm supposed to wear in squat, right? It's like,
just write squat on the inside.
I know I should.
Well, I think that having a coach, it also gives you, that support ahead of time. So you have somebody to go to. And I don't, Rory, I don't know if you have I'm sure that you have varying degrees of clients in terms of how they respond to things. There are clients that could, tweak their back and then they don't submit a check-in and then you've got to chase them down and they're like, well, I couldn't train because I tweaked my back. And then there's clients who tweak their back and then send an emergency message.
Right.
And really like we want the latter because we want to be able to say, okay, hey, this sucks. I know it sucks. I've done it.
It happens to everyone. Yeah.
But it will be okay, but it sucks right now. And here's what we should do. So sort of to reroute and guide from like day one, rather than it even getting to day 7, going, where are you? What's going on? Only to find out that they're like waiting to feel better to train when that's not really what we want. That's already sort of breaking habits and getting into the Netflix and chipsing.
Chips. I'm sorry, guys.
Is that the name of this episode?
I don't know.
Netflix
and chips.
That's
yeah.
No, but you're definitely right. There is the client who will like go missing for 2 weeks and you're always like, hello, are you there?
I know, I get nervous.
I know. Oh God.
Are they okay?
Yeah. But I think, this is insightful for us as coaches and clinicians as well, because I feel like there's just so many things that we can tweak in our check-in process and our onboarding process to set people up for more success so that we don't get those people who disappear for 2 weeks because they tweaked their back and couldn't train and were waiting to feel better. Like we can anticipate that that's going to happen at some point for someone, which we do. We anticipate injuries are going to happen. And, we always talk about injury risk reduction versus injury prevention. And the cool thing, and this is what I love about what we do, is that, okay, so someone tweaks their back or whatever, but their training never gets interrupted when they're our clients. I would say maybe like 1% of the time people really have to stop training, versus client, coaches who, their clients really get run into the ground and quit or don't train when they are injured. And so like that's something that I pride ourselves on, in terms of our injury rates are low and our time out from training is almost zero for our clients. But there are those people, and I think that we can anticipate that, and we can also we can change or improve our process as coaches, taking the information that we've just learned from you and prepare a little bit better. And I think that's the key, is that we want to be prepared with skills and tools and support for when it happens, versus needing to find those tools, supports, and skills when it happens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and having a plan is certainly a big thing. It gives you a sense of control. We can't plan for everything, right? And so how do we also foster that level of adaptability? Should I get injured and should I experience these barriers? What can we plan for, right? What barriers do we typically see and what can we plan for? And what are we going to do when that happens, right? maybe we can't physically work out in the gym, but maybe we go into the gym and we do our visualization in there. We stay connected to the sport by
Mhm.
physically being present and staying in that habit. That could be part of your plan. But then it's also like, how do we teach some adaptability, right? How do we teach some skills that are needed so that we can be adaptable, so that we can adjust our athletic identity so it's not 100%, maybe it's 60% of who we are. Getting really clear on that can be helpful in mastering that ability to be adaptable in those situations.
Yeah, I think that kind of ties into one of the other topics that we wanted to talk with you about is um, the evolution of an athlete's identity, or the building of their identity so it doesn't solely rely on their sport. So, what are some strategies that powerlifters can use to help them as they evolve over their career? Um, things like age and occupation and family status, injury, or illnesses um, can impact a person's ability to perform at the level that they've always performed at, whether that's just they are a recreational power lifter, they just engage in strength training for health and strength. um so these things can impact a person's ability to perform at the level that they were performing at, dedicate time to training, time to nutrition, all that kind of stuff. So, what are some strategies we can use to help our identity evolve over time, and so that it doesn't solely rely on our sport or
Yeah.
powerlifting?
I mean, it's tough. The research shows that the stronger your athletic identity, if you do get injured, the more likely you are to respond with maladaptive behaviors like isolation and feeling those levels of depression
Mm-hmm.
and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So there is research that supports that going all in your sport 100% and only identifying as a power lifter can be pretty dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're at 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that the reality is there are a lot of athletes out there who really only identify as an athlete. This is why, like when I was at the NFL, there's an entire phase of the development of an athlete that's focused on transitioning out of sport
Mm-hmm.
because it's such a sensitive time, and planning for that transition and what that looks like can be really helpful to navigate it. The other thought is, who else are you? Who else are you? Are you a daughter? Are you a sister? Are you a friend? Are you a baker? Are you what else? What else are you? If powerlifting were to go poof,
Mm-hmm.
who would you be? And just exploring what that looks like for you, and trying to identify what is that balance, um and how does that align with your mission of who you are and what you want to achieve in life. And so if you only want to be this very high elite professional power lifter, awesome. Let's go for it. And who else are you? Well, I want to be the best mom that I can be. I want to be the best dad that I can be. I want to be the best friend that I can be. I want to be the smartest at astrophysics. I don't know what these people do, but like I've worked in my career and in like with the executive coaching, and they'll say, I'm starting to think I should be doing a different career, but like I'm a astrophysicist at NASA. How could I possibly be anything else? Right. So it's perfectly normal to go through this like identity crisis, we call it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, but if we can get clear on who else we are, I think we all go through life searching for meaning. Why are we here? What's the point? Who am I? We go on like a little bit of a soul search. Some skills that you can use to try to identify that, one is try to answer that question, right? Who else am I? If my sport were to disappear tomorrow, who else am I? And getting clear on that. The other thought is to try to look at, what are other athletes doing, to anything that they do on the side. Is that interesting to me? Is that exciting for me? Sometimes watching other people model the behavior that you see can be helpful. It can help you build a little bit of confidence. That can get in the way at times too, like the comparison trap. Oh, this person's doing this, I should be doing that, right?
Well, so just kind of following up on the comparison trap, do you feel like social media kind of changes that a little bit, where the athletes are only showing their athletic side and they're not showing their family side or their other interests, and all they're showing is their competitiveness or their sport? And so,
Gosh.
I mean, I think as an athlete in the sport who follows other athletes in the sport as well, it's like, I mean, my story blows up when I put something about JD on there, but I don't see a lot of other high level athletes doing that. Like, they create their lifting account and all they do is post lift stuff or powerlifting or this or that or related, it's you're getting pigeonholed into that identity of lifter versus the other elements of who they are as a person,
Oh my God, I have
so
so many problems with social media. Like, I can't even, like, where do we get started on this? But, especially with athletes who are more in the youth areas, that, their mind is so fragile. It's so
mhm,
easily influenced. And um, there are benefits and there are cons to social media. One is exactly what you just said. It's your highlight reel, right? And most of the time, people are only posting they're the best situations that they've had, their best performances that they've had. Um, and what we see with that, and I've seen this a lot with athletes that I work with, is that they'll compare. Oh, this guy never takes a break. He's always on. He's always in the gym. Well, you're only seeing that very small snippet of their life. They're still a human being. They're not a robot. This is something I will say over and over and over again. There are times where they'll slip up. They will have nights where they're Netflixing and chipsing, but they're not posting it on social media for you to see that. And so once we kind of get back to reality of what else could this person be doing with their time that doesn't look like that, and we bring that back into reality, and they're like, oh, okay, this person isn't this big shiny perfection. They probably are also having some other challenges that I just don't know about.
mhm,
And so comparing yourself to their highlight reel, of course you feel horrible. No wonder you feel like crap after looking at that.
mhm,
But when we get into put things into perspective of what that really is, the other thought is there are tools where social media can be helpful. Seeing somebody who looks like you, who acts like you, who you identify a little bit with, maybe trying a new skill. We call this self-efficacy in sport and performance psychology. When you watch somebody who looks like you try something new and you see
mhm,
that they did it successfully, you say to yourself, oh, if they can do that, I could do that. And it creates motivation, it builds a sense of confidence, and it gives you an opportunity to try it. So if you're experiencing an injury and you watch somebody come back from that injury successfully and you identify with that person, if you're a youth athlete and you watch a professional athlete come back, that's probably not going to influence you the same way as if you see another youth athlete who's experienced that same level of injury, who you identify a little bit with
mhm,
as similar to you.
mhm.
That might influence your confidence to feel like, oh, if that person could do it, I could probably do it.
I love it. That's why we're doing
So
this
there are
podcast
positives.
series.
Yeah. Yeah, there
No,
are
I love it. Yeah.
positives.
I love it. And that's why I mean, Alyssa, you're not really on social media, but I try and really share the no, she's not. She doesn't
I
have
mean,
one.
I'm
Good for you,
there. I'm more of
Alyssa.
a
She's there.
taker than a
She's a
giver.
lurker.
Yeah.
But that's why and this has been one of my struggles with social media as well, is that, like, I definitely fall into that comparison trap. But as I have been shifting in my identity, as I've been experiencing injuries and a shift in my identity outside of training, which is becoming a new mom and the struggles of pandemic and C-section and all the injuries that I've had, I share those because there are just so many. Like, I don't only share my highlight reel because of the negative impact that highlight reels have had on me. And it's part of, my mission. I mean, I'm not always on social media. There's like too much going on sometimes for me to show up on social media. But like most of the time when I show up now on social media, if you see a post, it's like, this is my reality. Like, I'm training, but like, here's what's going on, you know, because
Mhm.
it's like, this is nowhere near my normal or like my pre mom level of training, but like, this is my reality. And I know that there's people out there who are experiencing this, but no one is sharing it with them. You see
Mhm.
the elite powerlifters who have babies and come back and are like surpassing their level, but the that's not the norm, you know? And there's not enough of the norm shared, um, because people are afraid to share it, I think. People are afraid of being vulnerable. But if we don't share the vulnerability, or we don't share our lows or our normals, and we're only sharing our highlights, I think that's when social media becomes a negative. Well, obviously there's the element of, sure, if it's you know, they can see themselves in that athlete and coming back, or you know, whatever. But um when we only see highlight reels, it becomes a very negative space and can influence us negatively. And I've been a victim of that. And as a coach, as a physical therapist, and as an athlete and mom, who deals with mental health issues, I think it's so important. And so, like, people, share your story. Just don't share, like, don't only share the highlights, you know, um, because I think, like I said, it's just, that's like 1% of people's life. Like, think about it. A power lifter, an elite level power lifter, they're not training 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know, and that's all they're sharing with you, you know.
Yeah.
So there's other things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about.
Are you
Yeah.
Maybe they
sure?
are.
Because
Maybe they are in pain and they're just not telling anyone, you know.
probably.
Yeah, so
And it's just
um
so unfair to compare yourself to somebody who has a different level of resources, a different
right.
level of accessibility like that.
Mhm.
How unfair to be able to do that and being able to notice those judgments, a big a huge thing which I'm surprised I haven't mentioned it by now, that I do try to advocate athletes to do is to practice mindfulness, which is
Mhm.
the act of paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non judgmentally. Wow, what a long definition. But non judgmentally is the key thing. We're so used to judging things as good or bad. And
Mhm.
there is a neutral ground. There is
Mhm.
there is acceptance of this is what it is. And we can get that's a skill. That's a skill that
Mhm.
we can learn, is to notice, am I judging? Am I judging if this is good or bad? Do I want
Mhm.
this? I don't have this. I should have that, blah blah blah. And noticing that pattern is not serving you. And it sounds like, Rory, what you just talked about is you were able to notice, okay, this is a trigger for me to go on this comparison journey of like swipe, swipe, swipe. Let's see what's happening. And noticing, okay, this is really triggering for me. This is very stressful for me. This is making me feel like a victim.
Mhm.
And you took your power back and decided, okay, I'm going to start to change the narrative and shift the conversation. And instead of spending my time looking at stuff that is really unrealistic, I'm going to join the conversation and share what is realistic. And that
Mhm.
requires a lot of bravery to be able to do that. So I admire that you're able to do that.
Thank
And
you.
for people who are not ready to do that, to take that step, the first step is just noticing, okay, am I spending a lot of time judging, and how is that impacting my mental well-being?
I like that the mindfulness is so important. And I think you used to do, I don't know if you still do this, but you used to do mindfulness sessions on your Instagram. You used to do the lives. Do you still do that?
I think I got to get back into that toward the end of the. I like to do that toward the end of Q2, like in
Mhm.
June, when
Mhm.
athletes go into the summertime. And
Mhm.
you know I do work a lot with team athletes who are in school,
Mhm.
right? And they're they're at school from 7 in the morning until 2 o'clock and or
Right.
2:30, and then they're going right to sport, and then they're doing their homework, and then they're
Mhm.
doing private lessons,
So
and then
they
they're doing
shouldn't be on
agility.
social
I'm
media.
like, when are you sleeping? I don't even know. But mindfulness, that's actually when you should use mindfulness the most, but I find that the attendance rate is just not that
Mhm.
great. And so but yeah, I do like to do those mindfulness sessions. They're very
So
important.
everything that you shared with us today has been, like, I feel like extremely honored to have spoken with you today. I'm sure Alyssa you know a lot more about this stuff than I do, but I'm sure you learned a lot today as well. When we had John do like a functional anatomy podcast with us, and I mean we know all that stuff because it's like what we studied and do every day, but it was like a private lecture for us that now everybody gets on the podcast. So this has been really, really awesome. I'm glad we got to speak with you and learn from you. And there's definitely some things that I'm going to take away from this and talk with Alyssa and kind of reboot our intake process and our weekly and monthly check-in process as well to incorporate more of this so that we can help build skills in advance and awareness in advance, I think is key. But skills and all that kind of stuff. But where can people connect with you? And I think the mindfulness is those mindfulness sessions. They were just like free lives on your Instagram that I tuned into a couple times, and I found them really helpful. So where can people connect with you if they're interested in either just learning more from you or hooking up for some mental performance or mindfulness coaching with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at my mental flex, my mental flex, and then also on my website, mymentalflex.com, where you can set up a free consultation if you're interested in exploring how you could level up your mental game. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just for when you get injured, it's absolutely more effective if we could start before that
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be a great place to find me.
Awesome. So we'll link all of those in the show notes. And thank you so much again for joining us. This has been an extremely informative and exciting podcast, and I look forward to it going live so that people can have access to your knowledge, your kindness, and connect with you outside of the podcast. All right, everyone, that's it for now, and we'll talk to you guys next time.